I recall sitting on my couch and I was supposed to be working late that day. And I had a call from a family who I'd been working with. And they said, Kate, the Taliban is at the door and we are really worried and we don't know what to do. And my heart sunk because I knew what I was about to hear on the phone. And unfortunately, over the course of the next hour, I heard people who I had loved and had been working with for many, many months get shot and murdered by the Taliban on the phone.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all happy and healthy along with your respected families, wherever you're located on this God's green earth. Welcome to today's episode of the Real Talks with Amini, and I'm honored to have Kate Kovarovic, a civilian attorney who has been extensively involved in the evacuation of Afghans since 2021. And we'll talk with her about her experience helping Afghans, what are some of the challenges that she has encountered and continues to foresee, and what are some of the recommendations that she has for the policymakers to address this important issue. So welcome to our show, Kate. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. Maybe we can start by describing what prompted you to join the effort after 2021. You're a civilian attorney specializing in veterans law. So
Yeah.
what made you to join this endeavor to help Afghans in need after 2021?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I have long admired your work, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to chat with you today. I got involved in the work a little bit by accident. It was through my relationships with veterans. So I remember watching in August of 2021, watching on the news as Kabul fell and thinking that the veterans who I work really closely with were going to be deeply impacted by what was happening. A couple of weeks later, a longtime friend of mine who was involved in the evacuation from day one said, Hey, my organization is really struggling to get people to pay attention to this issue. Do you think that you could help for a couple of weeks? And I said yes. And now, years and years later, I'm still involved because even though at the time I didn't have any sort of connection to Afghanistan, I've never been there, I've never served in the military. I have come to love the Afghan community as though they are my own. And I genuinely can't imagine a time where I will feel like I don't need to be doing this work because I think there's always going to be more for us to do. So it's been a pleasure. It's been a challenge. But this really was just born from a friend asking for a favor and then feeling really, really tied to the community that I got to meet.
Well, that's great. I mean, Afghans are grateful to have you as a compassionate and dedicated voice for them, and of course, American allies having an extra hand to help on the matter. I'm sure they appreciated all of the work that you've been doing. So maybe you can tell us about a story that stayed with you. I'm sure you interacted with a lot of Afghans at risk, the women protesters, the various types that you helped. What is one of the story or a moment that you can share with us that has stayed with you that is still, kind of shapes the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I tended to focus on work with at-risk women and sick children, in particular the female protesters. One of the stories that has always stayed with me was a story of a little girl. She was 5 when I came into contact with her. Her name was Ifat. And by the time I met Ifat and her family, they had already been moved out of Afghanistan and into a refugee camp in Qatar. And Ifat had a really debilitating skin disability. And when you hear about a skin disability, I think people think that it's a really surface level sort of, problem. Really, though, it was life-threatening because her inner organs weren't functioning properly. She wasn't able to keep food down. She was having vision problems, like her vision was starting to degrade. So she obviously wasn't able to get access to the care that she needed at a refugee camp. And I don't say that because I think the refugee camps, I think they try really hard to give meaningful medical assistance when they can. But it just wasn't going to be enough. She needed her bandages changed every single day, twice a day. It took about 5 hours. She needed a bath to be able to do it. And it was probably 2 years before we were able to get any sort of progress in her case. And I remember meeting her when she first got to the camp, and she was so full of light. She was just this beautiful little girl. She loved the color pink, and she loved kittens, and she loved her sister. And watching that light really dim over those 2 years. And it didn't just affect Aoife, right? Her parents started to suffer mentally very, very much because they were seeing that their daughter really needed specialized medical care and they weren't going to be able to provide it. And so it very quickly became a situation where all four family members were at risk of losing their lives because we simply couldn't get them to a place where she had access to the right kind of doctors. And I'm delighted to say that now Aoife is happily resettled in Canada. She has access to the care that she needs. She's thriving at school. She still loves the color pink. But it was one of those stories that I think really underscored why humanitarian advocacy is so important because you can hear about a broad problem and understand the mechanics of it, but when you put a face to it, it's a very different situation. And I just remember looking at this little girl in the eyes and looking at her parents who were weeping every time we spoke to them and thinking, this is a policy failure that's going to take the life of a 5-year-old. And so, while I'm really happy that that particular story had my cat did join us. I'm so sorry about that. I'm really happy that we were able to get this one family to the help they need. I think it underscores a lot of similar problems that many other families have faced in the past few years.
Yep. And I mean, Aoife was fortunate to have you and other volunteers advocating for her.
Yes.
And we are pleased that she's doing well in Canada. And
Yes.
there are thousands of girls like Aoife who are doing very well across America and Canada, Western
Yes.
countries. Unfortunately, millions of others are still stuck in Afghanistan and
Yes.
under a brutal regime of the Taliban terrorists who deny them, basic rights to go to school, to university, to work, and they have no future whatsoever, which
Mhm.
underscores the importance and value of the work of being able to evacuate as many people as we could at the
Yes.
time from Afghanistan who were at risk. And even
Yes.
though a number of others are still stuck, that hopefully at some point we'll find a solution for them as well. But that's
Yes.
something for another episode, another discussion.
Of course.
You also worked as a director of the resilience program.
I
So, what
did.
did you learn in terms of the psychological impact that this type of work had on the volunteers themselves?
I love that question because not a lot of people actually ask it. I think they're very focused on what the mental health of Afghans was like during that time, which of course I understand. But the one takeaway that I have from that time is that humanitarian workers bear the exact same scars as the people that they're trying to help. Because you get involved in this work because you have the heart for it and you want to actually contribute to these communities and support them. These people very much become our friends and our families. And I think that it was really hard for people to understand why we were so deeply impacted, but their stories become ours and we live those moments with them. Like I recall sitting on my couch and I was supposed to be working late that day and I had a call from a family who I'd been working with and they said, "Kate, the Taliban is at the door and we are really worried and we don't know what to do." And my heart sunk because I knew what I was about to hear on the phone. And unfortunately, over the course of the next hour, I heard people who I had loved and had been working with for many, many months get shot and murdered by the Taliban on the phone. And I think that people don't understand that when you get involved in an effort like this, you're involved in every single part of it. You get involved in the messy parts because in a lot of cases, if we're not able to move an Afghan to safety, the least that we can do for them is make sure that they feel heard. So I was always picking up the phone. I was always listening to them. I was sitting with them in those moments, but that has an impact on your heart as well because you're seeing the very best of humanity and the Afghans that you get to work with, and also the very worst and the people who are trying to hurt them. And so I think that we talk a lot about the clinical phrases of things like moral injury and compassion fatigue and burnout.
Yeah.
But really, if people don't understand, it's very similar to PTSD.
Mhm.
So the volunteers, people who were not trained to be doing this work and lacked meaningful mental health support, were engaging in these situations that scarred them, and they will carry those experiences with them for the rest of their lives. And I'm so grateful that you asked that question because I do think that the volunteers really deserve to have their stories told as well.
Absolutely. And are there resources available in the in public arena that they could utilize to benefit from those, to address some of the challenges, the mental challenges that they would face?
There weren't very many, to be perfectly honest. I think when you're thinking about the most at-risk groups, a lot of the efforts were going directly again to the Afghan
Yeah.
families, which I absolutely understand. One of the projects that I took on when I was the director of resiliency programming for the Afghan Evac Coalition is I started something called the Resilience Duty Officer Program, the RDO program. And we say it suffered from catastrophic success because really what we were trying to do was to set up a 24/7 hotline where the volunteers could talk to another volunteer if they were in a moment of crisis.
Mhm.
And it was difficult because the people who were staffing the program, the RDOs themselves, didn't have a lot of mental health training aside from what I was able to give them. But the benefit of the program is that if you were in a state of crisis, you were going to be able to reach out to somebody who absolutely understood why you were feeling the way that you're feeling. Because there was a big gap we were noticing between the practitioners, like the mental health practitioners who were trying to offer support, and their understanding of what the experience was like. So if you're sitting across the couch from a therapist and you're talking about, I was getting my toddler ready for school, and then my group of women got taken into custody, it was really hard for the practitioners to understand. And so the RDO program was meant to offer these people a place where they, like a soft landing place is what I call it, somebody who could understand what their experience was and talk with them through it. The program had hundreds of calls, unfortunately, over the course of just, I think, the 9 months that it ran. And eventually we did have to shut it down because the RDOs were struggling.
Mhm.
So we did have other professionals step in at that point. There's a nonprofit called Give an Hour that has offered an immense amount of support for the volunteers themselves. I mean, they've hosted virtual support groups, they've hosted wellness day events, they have really taken on training of practitioners so that they can understand what the unique needs of the volunteers were. But it was very difficult to pull together a program as you're in the chaos of the withdrawal. And unfortunately, it was something that we had to do because we were at risk of losing, some of our volunteers to their own mental health, and that's not what we wanted.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm glad the initiative worked, and I
Yeah.
hope that other people could see the success story and then replicate it, and then learn from it, and then see in what type of other situations that they could apply it.
Yes.
These things come and go all the time in our lives. So it's better for us to learn from the efforts that helps us significantly in terms of the core people that are handling the affairs directly
Yes.
themselves.
Yes. I
So thank you
agree.
very much for doing that, Kate. With the given situation that this the not as much attention on the Afghan situation as there should have been,
Right.
and in some cases negative attention, unfortunately.
Right.
What are some of the challenges that the Afghan families who have been evacuated or resettled, the refugees, are still struggling with that you're hearing that they need to be still addressed?
I think there are two things. I think in general, they lack a lot of meaningful resettlement support. So I think a lot of times once we bring Afghans over to the United States, we think that they're good, they're safe, they're out of the clutches of the Taliban. But what we're really underestimating is what it feels like to have to flee your home under dangerous circumstances when you didn't want to leave, and then to have to go into a new country where the culture is completely different and assimilate yourselves because there aren't people who are there to really assist. So I want to give credit to the resettlement agencies. They do offer a lot of meaningful support, but it is short term and it is more practical. It's how do we get you into housing for the next couple of months? How do we get you, groceries? But it's not things like how do we teach you how to speak English? How do we teach you about public transportation because you don't have a car? And I think there is Afghan culture is very distinct and beautiful and special. And I think that we have really struggled to make a space for it here. So I think that we need to pay far more attention to what happens to these families when they come here. In terms of the negative attention, I think what you're really speaking to in particular is the past year when we're looking at all of these changes in the immigration landscape, right? I think that this administration came in with a very clear idea of who they wanted in the country and who they didn't. And now they're taking whatever narratives they can to support the story that Afghans are somehow unsafe for us to live with. And so I look at the Afghans who I know, and I have to say that it is one of the most loving communities I have ever had the privilege of engaging with. Afghan culture is very community oriented, right? It's why their understanding of a family is so much bigger. It's why you can't go to an Afghan's house and not expect to sit there for 3 hours eating a meal with them, right? And I just think that people don't understand the culture. And so instead, they tend to demonize it. And when I look at stories about Afghans and the way that people talk about that culture, it really breaks my heart because there is an absolute lack of fact in the things that people are saying. And so I think that is a huge challenge that we have right now is that there's a big narrative out there and it's something that we're working really, really hard to combat. But when you're talking about fear and you have a political government that is trying to stoke that fear instead of, sharing what the truth actually is, it feels like it's going to be a constant uphill battle. So it's something certainly that we're trying to focus on, and it has been one of the harder challenges, particularly of the last year.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it shouldn't have been the case because Afghans have been the
I
most
know.
loyal
I know.
partners of America. Not just in the past 20 years that we were fighting terrorism, but also before that when we were fighting communism. A lot of people
Yes.
forget that. Afghans were on
Yes.
the front line defending the free world. The cost of millions being killed, injured,
Yeah.
wounded, and being refugees. And then in the past 20 years, being on the front line fighting against terrorism. And now that we lost everything in Afghanistan, and together we decided to evacuate to leave, and we couldn't stay because everyone was in danger, as you indicated and described the stories where people were shot if they would have left. A lot of
Yes.
more people would have been killed. But these people came for safety, but they came with
I
only
know.
one backpack in
I
most
know.
cases. To start from zero, losing everything, leaving everything behind, starting from zero, it is a challenge. It is a problem, but this community is not a threat. This community is a safety net. This community is a contributing factor for the future of America and
Yes.
also for the future of Afghanistan. We will go
Yes.
back at some point, and all of this resource and capabilities will be used for the sake of America. And already Afghans are contributing throughout the American society in various ways, from military to police force to other law enforcement entities, as well as civilian work that they're doing honorably. And
Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll get through this. I'm sure it's a wind that will pass. This friendship that is forged with blood and with values, it's gonna be sustainable for a long time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you
you're
very much.
you're saying something so important that I think a lot of civilians in America don't understand, which is that a lot of our veterans and service members wouldn't have made it back from Afghanistan if it weren't for the Afghan brother and sisters that they were serving alongside with. I have heard countless stories of people coming in and saying, my interpreter saved my life by, warning me of something that was happening. There were Afghans who were in the vehicles that were blown up with the Americans. There's a phrase that we hear a lot in military culture, which is shoulder to shoulder. We fight shoulder to shoulder with the man and woman next to us. And that's what Afghans really did, especially, yes, over these last 20 years. And so when we look at this culture, because we don't understand it, we try to demonize it. That's not what we should be doing. We should be saying, Afghans welcomed us and they took us under their wing and they protected us in very long-term, significant ways. We owe them that same sort of protection now.
Yep, absolutely. And given the fact that we have a shared enemy in front of us, not just the
Yes.
Taliban who are in charge, but also other evil actors in the
Yes.
neighborhood that is
Yes.
enemy of both of us. So we need to tackle them together as
Yes.
trusted allies and friends and partners. And now all of these Afghans are going to be future citizens and as citizens of America, Afghan
I hope
citizens of
so.
America. So
Yep.
we will deal with that. You also you're running right now a daily operation information a channel, basically sharing for Afghans as well as
Yes.
volunteers. So, what are some of the challenges that you're hearing with the process of evacuation, the SIVs, and resettlement, family reunification that you can share?
I started this information channel about a year ago, and I wanted it to be a place where people could look for definitive information about how to help with evacuation and relocation and resettlement, all of the parts that involve bringing an Afghan to a place of safety and making sure that they thrive. I think that the hardest part in the beginning was making sure that the information that I was posting was accurate because I do have a lot of Afghans who I now have worked with for a very long time. And they would send a lot of information about, okay, there's a security threat in this neighborhood, or we're hearing rumors of this. It's really difficult from my office in the state of Maryland to be able to sort out what was and wasn't factual. And so it took a little bit of learning for that. I think now what the biggest challenge is keeping people's spirits up because when you're looking at the language that this administration is using, they're talking about a quote unquote permanent pause, in immigration for Afghans. And what they're really talking about is we should be looking at the word permanent. We are hearing that at a minimum for the next 3 years, while this administration remains in power, Afghans don't have a formal pathway into the United States. And so all of these people who we love and have been working with for years and years been their paperwork and their interviews and their processing suddenly have had the door just get slammed in their face. And it's really hard to go to this group of people and to say, keep your spirits up. The tide will change. It always does. But when you're in the moment where things are really working against you, I think it's hard to remember that. And so it has been challenging to keep the volunteer spirits up and to make sure that Afghans know that not everybody supports what's happening in this country when it comes to their immigration policies. And for Afghans to know that we are still with you. We're not giving you bad news because we want to. We're trying to give you honest advice about how to get you to a place of safety. But I promise that we are still as with you. We are still your allies as we ever have been before.
Yeah. I'm sure Afghans believe that
I
and they're still
hope.
hopeful on that despite the
Yeah.
challenges. But it's been very unfortunate, to see, as you indicated, the door being closed upon them, even though they've served America and they are at
Yes.
risk and they have to leave and they have to be here, but they can't.
Yes.
We are hoping people are keeping fingers crossed that hopefully they will do whatever they're doing, the vetting or the investigations
Yeah.
or looking into the system, that they could restart back the process at
Yes.
some point.
Yeah.
But as you stated, maybe it won't happen in the next 2 years. So let's see what other changes will happen in the next 2 years. But what we know
Yeah.
is that a lot of families are being affected negatively, and our people
100%.
are being struggling, and that's
Yes.
very unfortunate. But staying on the course of Afghans who are already here,
Yeah.
and also Afghans who are waiting to be here. What
Yep.
if you could deliver one policy message to the policymakers in the United States in terms of their obligation towards their Afghan allies, whether it's moral or strategic, what would that be?
I think that I'm better positioned to speak to the moral imperative, right? Because strategic, I think, is more of a military and intelligence factor, which is something I have less experience with. But when we're talking about morals, we're talking about an entire country of people who not only allowed us to come in because we were trying to improve our national security and I think the infrastructure in Afghanistan, but they protected us, they worked with us. I think that Afghans did everything that they possibly could have with the constraints that they had to put us on the path of success. And so when I talk about, we stood shoulder to shoulder with Afghans, they stood shoulder to shoulder with us. And a lot of times that's because we gave them our word. We said that we might not be able to help you right now, but if you help us, we will come back at a certain point and we will bring you and your families to safety. It was such a decent basic fundamental promise for people who are giving up everything for us. And then we turned our backs on them. And so aside from the fact that why should people ever trust the United States in the future? Why should they ever want to partner with us militarily if something similar happens like this? But I also think like we need to consider what the impact is on the Afghans who we have already worked with. And I think that it is very important that we look at what the numbers are when we're talking about our moral imperative, right? Afghans, by and large, have been reliable, honest, supportive partners. And it is our job to actually give our word and then follow through on it, or else we are the bad partners in this situation, not the Afghans. So the word moral imperative is something that I have thought a lot about over the last couple of years. And I think that that's the thing that I really want our politicians to understand. Don't tell people that you should put your life at risk for Americans, and then when their lives are actually at risk, abandon them. And that's truly what has happened.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's very unfortunate, but hopefully we'll see positive change. We're still hopeful.
Yes.
But if we can get your take on the recent tragic incident, the terrorist attack that has happened in Washington, D.C. by one of the
Yeah.
Afghan partners,
Yeah.
unfortunately. If you can speak to that, and also given the fact that there's a lot of stories or rumors and narratives that are being built around that,
Yes.
as you indicated earlier, to demonize the whole community. If
Yes.
you can tell the American public and American policymakers of who are these Afghans that are here based on your work directly with them in the past 4 years, and what contributions do they make in these communities?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the first thing that I do want to say, especially as somebody who works with the veteran community, is to express to the loved ones of Sarah Backstrom and Andrew Wolf that there are entire communities across the world who are mourning and grieving alongside with you. No one should ever have to watch their family member be the victim of political violence. And that's really what this was. I think that when we're talking to policymakers about what the response to this is, What I'm seeing is that they're taking a story and they're using it to fit their narrative. But when you're trying to make policies, you should be looking at evidence-driven data, right? And the evidence here tells us that the majority of Afghans who are in the United States they're not radical extremists. They are good neighbors to us. They really just want to be able to settle here and have meaningful lives that feel good to them. And so when we're looking at how we're going to use that event to support policy, I think it's important that we acknowledge that aside from many other factors, including what this individual's mental health was, this is one individual. There's no evidence that this is something that the Afghan community as a whole supported. I think what's also equally as important to me is that in the last week, have seen more Afghans stepping in to offer their support to the families and the National Guardsmen who are still on the streets in DC and to say, this is not something that our community feels good about. This is not representative of how we feel about America. We want you to be safe and we are grieving alongside you. I think one of the most impactful moments that I've had, and I actually, like, I have goosebumps thinking about it, was there was a candlelight vigil in Washington, D.C. for Sarah Backstrom after she passed away. And I saw dozens of Afghans stopping by that vigil so that they could offer their support. Again, in my estimation, Afghan culture is gentle in its kindness, right? Like Afghans walk around with an open heart. They want people to feel safe. They want them to feel respected. And so I just, this one incident came from a very specific place, and using it to inform policy and to shape a narrative is not only dangerous, but it's really unfair to the majority of Afghans who don't share similar beliefs as that one perpetrator did.
Yeah.
And so it's been really devastating to see this one very violent, hateful act be assigned to the Afghan community at whole. I don't think it's indicative of Afghans. I don't think it's indicative of how they feel about Americans. And it has really broken my heart to see what's been happening in the news.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you're right about that, and we've been warning our partners in the government, those who are in the government and outside, about this. When you have a country run by a terrorist organization, if you leave it on its
Yes.
own and have the whole population at their mercy, the whole state structure, the whole system, communication, social media, even they're operating on social media very freely and other ways, and you engage with them and you talk with them and you encourage
Yeah.
them, and they get into these consulates, they reach to embassies and they get
Yes.
access to data. It is a vulnerability, and
Yes.
sooner or later that will hurt you. That will come and hurt you. And unfortunately, in this case, I will let the investigators to find the traces, but I'm sure that there were connections between the terrorists in charge of Afghanistan and this incident and this attack, because that's what they want. That's what they wish, that create mistrust, continue to create divide between Afghans and Americans, the way they fought for the past 20 years against us, and
Yeah.
they got what they wanted to make sure US leaves Afghanistan. And
Yes.
now all of the Afghans who have left, they're fearing that at some point they will come back and they will
Yes.
bring America with them. If not American forces and boots on the ground, but American values will be back.
Yes.
And so they don't want that. And so they are trying to create this environment of mistrust where God forbid, if the people will take a negative decision about the whole community or deport some
Yeah.
of them back to Afghanistan, these will be all basically handed over to the Taliban for them to be either
Yes.
executed or to be turned back against us. And
Yes.
to be trained as terrorists. Unfortunately, this was something that we've been warning, and we're still warning. And taking this opportunity, I would like to also share our condolences to the family of Sarah and all of their relatives. Afghans have been dying and by hundreds in the past 20 years fighting against these barbarics and civilians alike. And even here, they're not letting Afghans to live in peace. And through this
Right.
act of terrorism, by recruiting one individual to do this, they have made the whole community to be upset, and everybody's shocked.
Yes.
Everybody's sad and upset, and share with you in this grief, in this moment of loss. We are so familiar with it.
Yeah.
I can't find enough words to say about that. But we would like to tell you, we would like to assure you that we are with you in this together against all of the barbarics and all of the terrorists and all of the evildoers who are planning to do this. So rest assured that we're doing everything that we can on our part to make sure that our communities are clean, that all of the
Yes.
bad actors are taken care of. And there is no
Yes.
bad actor in America. And if there are, I'm sure relevant authorities are looking into it. If there are anybody, but those individuals will be identified, will be arrested, will be put to justice. And that is for the safety of Afghans, for the safety of America to do so. But the most important
Yes.
thing is that we need to look into Afghanistan as a whole, as a country, and we need to realize that for as long as we don't find a solution for that problem, we will
Yes.
always be vulnerable to threats, and we will always be vulnerable to attacks one way or another. And
Yes.
we need to find a solution for that. So thank you very much, Kate, to
Yeah,
you for all of the work that you're doing, for all of the advocacy work that you're
of
doing,
course.
that you have been doing. We're really grateful to have you. America is blessed to have you, and Afghans are grateful to have you. So we'll wish you continued success in all of the work that you're doing. If you have any final message for Afghans, you have the platform.
I just want to thank you again, Sadiq, because I feel really encouraged actually after our conversation and after the last few things that you were saying too. I hope that people really can take your words to heart and see that Afghans and Americans actually make very good friends, right? Like we share a lot in common. There are a lot in common with our interests that we should be looking at. To the Afghans right now who are watching what's happening in America, the only thing that I can really say is there is an entire community of volunteers. There's thousands of us who love and support you and want you to know that we are here with you throughout whatever happens. We're not leaving. These volunteers are not going to abandon you the way that the government necessarily has. And it will get harder, I expect, in the next couple of weeks, especially as we see some of the blowback from what happened with that attack. But there are people out there who can see very clearly who Afghans really are. We believe in you and we will not abandon you. And I hope that 4 years into this effort, Afghans are able to hear that we will stand by your side for as long as you need us to.
Thank you very much, Kate. We
Of
believed in
course.
America. We believe in
Yes.
America. We'll continue to believe in America no matter what happens. We are in this together. Thank you very much.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To all of the viewers, this was our episode of the Real Talks with Amini, with Kate Kovarovic, also
Yes.
known as Kate K among
Yep.
her colleagues, a dedicated voice, a volunteer, a civilian attorney, specializing in veterans law, but that came across this process of helping Afghans, and she's with us throughout all of these years, and she has been helping countless families and lives, and we're grateful to have her and a number of other colleagues who are doing this. Until our next episode, God bless you, God bless America, God bless Afghanistan, and God bless all of us. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.